Hey guys, welcome to the channel. So today, we will continue Sophie's world, so here we go. The myths. A precarious balance between the forces of good and evil. There was no letter for Sophie the next morning. All through the interminable day at school, she was bored stiff. She took care to be extra nice to Joanna during the breaks. On the way home, they talked about going camping as soon as the woods were dry enough. After what seemed an eternity, she was once again at the mailbox. First she opened a letter postmarked in Mexico. It was from her father. He wrote about how much he was longing for home and how for the first time he had managed to beat the chief officer at chess. Apart from that, he had almost finished the pile of books he had brought aboard with him after his winter leave. And then, there it was, a brown envelope with her name on it. Leaving her school bag and the rest of the mail in the house, Sophie ran to the den. She pulled out the new typewritten pages and began to read the mythological world picture. Hello there, Sophie. We have a lot to do, so we'll get started without delay. By philosophy we mean the completely new way of thinking that evolved in Greece about 600 years before the birth of Christ. Until that time, people had found answers to all their questions in various religions. These religious explanations were handed down from generation to generation in the form of myths. A myth is a story about the gods, which sets out to explain why life is as it is. Over the millennia, a wild profusion of mythological explanations of philosophical questions spread across the world. The Greek philosophers attempted to prove that these explanations were not to be trusted. In order to understand how the early philosophers thought, we have to understand what it was like to have a mythological picture of the world. We can take some Nordic myths as examples. There is no need to carry coals to Newcastle. You have probably heard of Thor and his hammer. Before Christianity came to Norway, people believed that Thor rode across the sky in a chariot drawn by two goats. When he swung his hammer, it made thunder and lightning. The word thunder in Norwegian, Thor d0n, means Thor's roar. In Swedish, the word for thunder is aska, originally azaka, which means God's journey over the heavens. When there is thunder and lightning, there is also rain, which was vital to the Viking farmers. So Thor was worshipped as the god of fertility. The mythological explanation for rain was therefore that Thor was swinging his hammer. And when it rained, the corn germinated and thrived in the fields. How the plants of the field could grow and yield crops was not understood, but it was clearly somehow connected with the rain. And since everybody believed that the rain had something to do with Thor, he was one of the most important of the Norse gods. There was another reason why Thor was important, a reason related to the entire world order. The Vikings believed that the inhabited world was an island under constant threat from outside dangers. They called this part of the world Midgard, which means the kingdom in the middle. Within Midgard lay Asgard, the domain of the gods. Outside Midgard was the kingdom of Utgard, the domain of the treacherous giants, who resorted to all kinds of cunning tricks to try and destroy the world. Evil monsters like these are often referred to as the forces of chaos. Not only in Norse mythology, but in almost all other cultures, people found that there was a precarious balance between the forces of good and evil. One of the ways in which the giants could destroy Midgard was by abducting Freya, the goddess of fertility. If they could do this, nothing would grow in the fields and the women would no longer have children. So it was vital to hold these giants in check. Thor was a central figure in this battle with the giants. His hammer could do more than make rain. It was a key weapon in the struggle against the dangerous forces of chaos. It gave him almost unlimited power. For example, He could hurl it at the giants and slay them. And he never had to worry about losing it because it always came back to him, just like a boomerang. This was the mythological explanation for how the balance of nature was maintained and why there was a constant struggle between good and evil, and this was precisely the kind of explanation that the philosophers rejected. But it was not a question of explanations alone. Mortals could not just sit idly by and wait for the gods to intervene while catastrophes such as drought or plague loomed. They had to act for themselves in the struggle against evil. This they did by performing various religious ceremonies, or rites. The most significant religious ceremony in Norse times was the offering. Making an offering to a god had the effect of increasing that god's power. For example, mortals had to make offerings to the gods to give them the strength to conquer the forces of chaos. They could do this by sacrificing an animal to the god. The offering to Thor was usually a goat. Offerings to Odin sometimes took the form of human sacrifices. The myth that is best known in the Nordic countries comes from the Edda poem, The Lay of Thrym. It tells how Thor, rising from sleep, finds that his hammer is gone. This makes him so angry that his hands tremble and his beard shakes. Accompanied by his henchman Loki, he goes to Freya to ask if Loki may borrow her wings so that he can fly to Jotunheim, the land of the giants, and find out if they are the ones who have stolen Thor's hammer. At Jotunheim, Loki meets Thrym, the king of the giants, who sure enough begins to boast that he has hidden the hammer 7 leagues under the earth. And he adds that the gods will not get the hammer back until Thrym is given Freya as his bride. Can you picture it, Sophie? Suddenly, the good gods find themselves in the midst of a full-blown hostage incident. The giants have seized the gods' most vital defensive weapon. This is an utterly unacceptable situation. As long as the giants have Thor's hammer, they have total control over the world of gods and mortals. In exchange for the hammer, they are demanding Freya. But this is equally unacceptable. If the gods have to give up their goddess of fertility, she who protects all life, the grass will disappear from the fields, and all gods and mortals will die. The situation is deadlocked. Loki returns to Asgard, so the myth goes, and tells Freya to put on her wedding attire, for she is, alas, to wed the king of the giants. Freya is furious and says people will think she is absolutely man-crazy if she agrees to marry a giant. Then the god Heimdall has an idea. He suggests that Thor dress up as a bride. With his hair up and 2 stones under his tunic, he will look like a woman. Understandably, Thor is not wildly enthusiastic about the idea, but he finally accepts that this is the only way he will ever get his hammer back, so Thor allows himself to be attired in bridal costume, with Loki as his bridesmaid. To put it in present-day terms, Thor and Loki are the gods' anti-terrorist squad. Disguised as women, their mission is to breach the giant's stronghold and recapture Thor's hammer. When the gods arrive at Jotunheim, the giants begin to prepare the wedding feast. But during the feast, the bride, Thor, that is, devours an entire ox and 8 salmon. He also drinks 3 barrels of beer. This astonishes Thrym. The true identity of the commandos is very nearly revealed. But Loki manages to avert the danger by explaining that Freya has been looking forward to coming to Jotunheim so much that she has not eaten for a week. When Thrym lifts the bridal veil to kiss the bride, he is startled to find himself looking into Thor's burning eyes. Once again, Loki saves the situation by explaining that the bride has not slept for a week because she is so excited about the wedding. At this, Thrym commands that the hammer be brought forth and laid in the bride's lap during the wedding ceremony. Thor roars with laughter when he is given the hammer. First he kills Thrym with it, and then he wipes out the giants and all their kin. And thus the gruesome hostage affair has a happy ending. Thor, the Batman or James Bond of the gods, has once again conquered the forces of evil. So much for the myth itself, Sophie. But what is the real meaning behind it? It wasn't made up just for entertainment. The myth also tries to explain something. Here is one possible interpretation: when a drought occurred, people sought an explanation of why there was no rain. Could it be that the giants had stolen Thor's hammer? Perhaps the myth was an attempt to explain the changing seasons of the year. In the winter nature dies, because Thor's hammer is in Jotunheim. But in the spring, he succeeds in winning it back. So the myth tried to give people an explanation for something they could not understand. But a myth was not only an explanation. People also carried out religious ceremonies related to the myths. We can imagine how people's response to drought or crop failure would be to enact a drama about the events in the myth. Perhaps a man from the village would dress up as a bride, with stones for breasts, in order to steal the hammer back from the giants. By doing this, people were taking some action to make it rain so the crops would grow in their fields. There are a great many examples from other parts of the world of the way people dramatized their myths of the seasons in order to speed up the processes of nature. So far, we have only taken a brief glimpse at the world of Norse mythology, but there were countless myths about Thor and Odin, Freyr and Freya, Hodder and Balder, and many other gods. Mythological notions of this kind flourished all over the world until philosophers began to tamper with them. A mythological world picture also existed in Greece when the first philosophy was evolving. The stories of the Greek gods had been handed down from generation to generation for centuries. In Greece, the gods were called Zeus and Apollo, Hera and Athene, Dionysus and Asclepios, Heracles and Hephaestus, to mention only a few of them. Around 700 BC, much of the Greek mythology was written down by Homer and Hesiod. This created a whole new situation. Now that the myths existed in written form, it was possible to discuss them. The earliest Greek philosophers criticized Homer's mythology because the gods resembled mortals too much and were just as egoistic and treacherous. For the first time it was said that the myths were nothing but human notions. One exponent of this view was the philosopher Xenophanes, who lived from about 570 BC. Men have created the gods in their own image, he said. They believe the gods were born and have bodies and clothes and language, just as we have. Ethiopians believe that the gods are black and flat-nosed. Thracians imagine them to be blue-eyed and fair-haired. If oxen, horses, and lions could draw, they would depict gods that looked like oxen, horses, and lions. During that period, the Greeks founded many city-states, both in Greece itself and in the Greek colonies in southern Italy and Asia Minor, where all manual work was done by slaves, leaving the citizens free to devote all their time to politics and culture. In these city environments, people began to think in a completely new way. Purely on his own behalf, any citizen could question the way society ought to be organized. Individuals could thus also ask philosophical questions without recourse to ancient myths. We call this the development from a mythological mode of thought to one based on experience and reason. The aim of the early Greek philosophers was to find natural, rather than supernatural, explanations for natural processes. Sophie left the den and wandered about in the large garden. She tried to forget what she had learned at school, especially in science classes. If she had grown up in this garden without knowing anything at all about nature, how would she feel about the spring? Would she try to invent some kind of explanation for why it suddenly started to Rain one day? Would she work out some fantasy to explain where the snow went and why the sun rose in the morning? Yes, she definitely would. She began to make up a story. Winter held the land in its icy grip because the evil Muriat had imprisoned the beautiful Princess Sakita in a cold prison. But one morning the brave Prince Bravado came and rescued her. Sakita was so happy that she began to dance over the meadows, singing a song she had composed inside the dank prison. The earth and the trees were so moved that all the snow turned into tears. But then the sun came out and dried all the tears away. The birds imitated Sakita's song, and when the beautiful princess let down her golden tresses, a few locks of her hair fell onto the earth and turned into the lilies of the field. Sophie liked her beautiful story. If she had not known any other explanation for the changing seasons, she felt sure she would have come to believe her own story in the end. She understood that people had always felt a need to explain the processes of nature. Perhaps they could not live without such explanations. And that they made up all those myths in the time before there was anything called science. The natural philosophers. Nothing can come from nothing. When her mother got home from work that afternoon, Sophie was sitting in the glider, pondering the possible connection between the philosophy course and Hilda Moller-Nag, who would not be getting a birthday card from her father. Her mother called from the other end of the garden. "Sophie, there's a letter for you." She caught her breath. She had already emptied the mailbox, so the letter had to be from the philosopher. What on earth would she say to her mother? There's no stamp on it. It's probably a love letter. Sophie took the letter. Aren't you going to open it? She had to find an excuse. Have you ever heard of anyone opening a love letter with her mother looking over her shoulder? Let her mother think it was a love letter. Although it was embarrassing enough, it would be even worse if her mother found out that she was doing a correspondence course with a complete stranger, a philosopher who was playing hide-and-seek with her. It was one of the little white envelopes. When Sophie got upstairs to her room, she found 3 new questions. Is there a basic substance that everything else is made of? Can water turn into wine? How can earth and water produce a live frog? Sophie found the questions pretty stupid, but nevertheless, they kept buzzing around in her head all evening. She was still thinking about them at school the next day, examining them one by one. Could there be a basic substance that everything was made of? If there was some such substance, how could it suddenly turn into a flower or an elephant? The same objection applied to the question of whether water could turn into wine. Sophie knew the parable of how Jesus turned water into wine, but she had never taken it literally. And if Jesus really had turned water into wine, it was because it was a miracle, something that could not be done normally. Sophie knew there was a lot of water, not only in wine, but in all other growing things. But even if a cucumber was 95% water, there must be something else in it as well, because a cucumber was a cucumber, not water. And then there was the question about the frog. Her philosophy teacher had this really weird thing about frogs. Sophie could possibly accept that a frog consisted of earth and water, in which case the earth must consist of more than one kind of substance. If the earth consisted of a lot of different substances, it was obviously possible that earth and water together could produce a frog. That is, if the earth and the water went via frog spawn and tadpoles. Because a frog could not just grow out of a cabbage patch, however much you watered it. When she got home from school that day, there was a fat envelope waiting for her in the mailbox. Sophie hid in the den, just as she had done the other days. The Philosopher's Project. Here we are again. We'll go directly to today's lesson without detours around white rabbits and the like. I'll outline very broadly the way people have thought about philosophy, from the ancient Greeks right up to our own day. but we'll take things in their correct order. Since some philosophers lived in a different age, and perhaps in a completely different culture from ours, it is a good idea to try and see what each philosopher's project is. By this I mean that we must try to grasp precisely what it is that each particular philosopher is especially concerned with finding out. One philosopher might want to know how plants and animals came into being. Another might want to know whether there is a God or whether man has an immortal soul. Once we have determined what a particular philosopher's project is, it is easier to follow his line of thought, since no one philosopher concerns himself with the whole of philosophy. I said his line of thought, referring to the philosopher, because this is also a story of men. Women of the past were subjugated both as females and as thinking beings, which is sad because a great deal of very important experience was lost as a result. It was not until this century that women really made their mark on the history of philosophy. I do not intend to give you any homework, no difficult math questions, or anything like that, and conjugating English verbs is outside my sphere of interest. However, from time to time I'll give you a short assignment. If you accept these conditions, we'll begin. So thank you for watching, and we will continue it in next part. Bye bye.